I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to another episode of Postcards from a Dying World, the 15th in the mini-series of Science Fiction Hall of Fame episodes. I believe this is Cora's third time doing the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. And but she's been on postcards before many times. But we have a new guest, John Baltisberger. Am I saying it correctly, John?
No, but that's okay. No one does. It's Baltisberger.
Baltisberger, yeah. Okay, so we'll get into who they are in a minute, but I just want to start off by saying, yes, I've been doing less episodes of Postcards from a Dying World. There's a reason for that. We got some big things that I'm organizing, and I want to put it on your radar, listeners and viewers. So coming up this August, 1 week before Worldcon in Orange County is the Philip K. Dick Festival, which I am helping to organize. August 20th through the 23rd, and at Cal State Fullerton in Orange County. And we're going to also have a pop-up museum of science fiction memorabilia, collectibles, and manuscripts that will be open both weekends. So if you want to look at the handwritten notes that Frank Herbert put in red pen on the first straight from the typewriter draft of Dune, well, shit, you can do it there because we'll have it there. The first straight from the typewriter manuscript of Man in the High Castle is going to be there, and much, much more. Old fanzines, all kinds of cool stuff. So, and that's a free pop-up museum at Cal State Fullerton. But during PKD Fest, we're going to have table reads of plays and screenplays based on Philip K. Dick work. We're going to have a short story contest, and we're going to have all kinds of academic papers and panels. And we have 3 guests of honor so far. World Fantasy Award-winning and Philip K. Dick Award-winning author Tim Powers will be there. And Sarah Langan, 3-time Bram Stoker Award-winning author Sarah Langan, and Brian Evanson, who I think is the best short story writer we have living at the moment. He's pretty good. And so those are our guests of honor, but we're going to have academic talks and things going on through the whole weekend. So look for that. And the first ever Pink Beam Awards for excellence in Philip K. Dick nerdery, as I've been joking about it. And we're giving a Lifetime Achievement Award to Lord Running Clam, who is, of course, the author of the Pink Beam, the Philip K. Dick Literary Companion. And so LRC is getting the Lifetime Achievement Pink Beam. So you don't want to miss that. So if you are into coming to fests and cons and things, Philip K. Dick Fest will be a great time to learn about Phil. We'll also have a bus tour where we'll be going to all the sites that he wrote about in Orange County and the places where he lived. So it's going to be a real fun time. So sorry, commercial out of the way. Also keep in mind that there's less of these episodes, but every Tuesday night I host the PKD Hangout, where we talk about science. It's basically like we have a different speaker every week. So it's a free science fiction class that you can take on Zoom, basically, with real deep cut science fiction. So just make it a part of your Tuesday nights. If you're interested, it's free. You can always come and do that. Okay, commercials are out of the way. If you don't know me, if you got here because of a Little Black Bag, I'm David Agranoff. I'm the host of this podcast. I'm a science fiction author and independent researcher and scholar, mostly dedicated to my man Philly KD. But I like all science fiction, including the author of this here story. So we'll get to that in a minute. So our guest today, Starting with the person who's beamed in the furthest. That would be Cora Buhlert of Germany. Cora, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Cora Buhlert. I'm from Bremen in North Germany, which is where it's currently both dark, cold, and snowy. And I'm a lifelong science fiction fan. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, and I'm the winner of the 2022 Hugo Award for Best Fan Writer. And yes, you can find me all over the internet under my name, and my main place is my blog. I should probably my name, so you could find it under www.corabuhlert.com. That's CoraBuhlert.com. And currently I'm writing way too many words on the Masters of the Universe trailer because I'm a huge fan and very excited for the movie. But eventually I also start writing about other things again. I'm very interested in the science fiction of the golden and silver ages, into the 60s and 70s. And that's also why I've been on this podcast 3 times so far.
Right.
I'm always happy to be back.
That's right. And you've also been on Dickheads to cover Lee Brackett's The Big Jump.
Yes. Yes. Regarding Lee Brackett, I have an article, a profile about Lee Brackett out right now in issue 8 of New Edge Sword and Sorcery magazine, which it should be available wherever you can find magazines online.
Yes, and we love our Lee Brackett around here. Much more than the co-screenwriter of Empire Strikes Back, Lee Brackett was a powerhouse, amazing queen of space opera back in the day.
That's actually the title of my article, is Lee Brackett, Queen of Space Opera, because it's a special issue. It's a Sword and Planet special and space opera special issue of New Edge Sword and Sorcery. Normally, they're obviously a Sword and Sorcery magazine.
Yeah. I speaking of, and one of the things that I'm doing for PKD Fest is that I started putting together a tour of sites of places, science fiction sites around LA, and I found where Lee Brackett is buried. And so part of the tour is going to be Lee Brackett's grave, and I'm working on trying to find her home. So if anybody has any leads on Lee Brackett's address in LA, I found Heinlein, I found Bradbury, I found Robert Bloch's home. I have not found Lee Brackett's home. So anybody who has any insight into that, at me, especially Blue Sky might be the easiest. But so I'm putting that out to the universe. If anybody has any clues on that, that would be great. And that's another thing we're planning on doing, is just driving around LA to all the places where these amazing people lived.
I really would love to experience that, but yeah, some other time when
maybe
travel is a bit easier again.
Yeah, well, I'm always in Southern California, so Cora, if you want to do that that tour or something, that we can do at any time. So that includes, by the way, some of the places where we have locations for places where the science fiction book club met in the 30s that still exist. So very cool stuff.
Isn't there one place where they Clifton Cafeteria or something like that, which is still around, which is apparently quite amazing?
Yep. And so very cool stuff. We just recently did a similar trip in the Bay Area for all the Philip K. Dick sites. And I got my first experience of going to the Marin County sites. So I got to do the walking commute when he wrote in the little hovel that was down the road from his house. We did that little walk. It was pretty amazing. So yeah, cool stuff. These are real places where people lived. John, you want to tell folks who you are, what you do, and what work you're currently selling at this time?
Absolutely. So I'm John Baltisberger. I am I'm a author of fantasy, science fiction, and horror. I'm also the owner of Manisard Press, that focuses on transgressive genre literature. So, those three, specifically those three genre, fantasy, sci-fi, horror. I met David at a convention out in Portland called BizarroCon.
Well, technically Astoria, but yes.
No, weren't you at a?
No, I met you at the Astoria one.
Okay, yeah. All right. See, my memory is not fantastic. I am also a scholar, only it's of obscure Jewish mythology and not anything anyone else wants to hear about. But as far as what I'm selling right now, I have a new book out called Dybbuk in the Doorway, which is Jewish erotic horror. If that sounds like something that would be interesting and fun for you, that is available on the conglomerate bookstore Amazon. And then a little bit later this year, I have a new science fiction book coming out called Of Worm and Man. So that's what I'm going to pitch. But yeah, we do a lot of work over at madnessheart.press to bring weird and experimental literature out into the world. We work with a lot of really amazing authors. So if you like weird books, definitely check out madnessheart.press. I am here because I really do have a deep and abiding love for science fiction. My reading journey got started as a child with, straight fantasy. And it was reading the sci-fi works of my favorite fantasy authors that kind of cued me into sci-fi. I was reading mostly and I apologize for whispering these forbidden names, but Pierce Anthony, Robert Aspirin, were the guys I cut my teeth. I know. Well, hey, I know.
Hey, right?
But it led the way to incredible fiction and
is there bad
just a
stuff about
fantastic
Robert
community.
Aspirin? I don't
Not
know
that I know of.
Okay.
Aspirin is always good. Pierce Anthony, well,
Oh, look, I'm not going to, because this is a public forum and not my public forum, I'm not going to say what I think about Pierce Anthony at this juncture.
Yeah,
but
you can say. Well,
he wrote.
All I'm saying is someone should check his hard. Someone should check his hard drive. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Son, which is one of his science fiction novels, hit the wall twice for me. Once when I read it as a teenager, and then I reread it for Galactic Journey, where I offered to review it simply because I thought maybe I was a tad too young to read it, and it hit the wall again.
I will say that
and that's supposedly the good one.
I was at an estate sale the other day, and I saw the entire Myth Inc. series by Robert Aspirin on the shelf, and I very nearly bought it just to make sure it would go somewhere. I resisted. I do want to say though, the science fiction I read that changed my life entirely, like completely changed my trajectory, was Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. That was the first time I wasn't reading what I might call YA science fiction.
Well, have you ever read Anthony Boucher's Rocket to the Morgue?
I don't believe I have.
Okay. That is a locked door murder mystery set in a fictionalized version of the science fiction writers group that Heinlein started in 1940 called the Mignana Literary Society. And actually the house that inspired that book is the one that we're going to in LA.
Very cool.
But I highly recommend that one. But Tony Boucher, we'll talk about him another time. We're here to talk about, of course, the science fiction Hall of Fame series, as always. And we're up to story number 15, which is Little Black Bag by CM Kornbluth. Now, the reason I wanted to have John on here, well, originally he was going to be recording this at his synagogue before the winter storm came. just coincidentally because of the timing. But John and I have talked about our Jewish background before quite a bit, and as far as I knew, as serious of a Jewish writer as CM Kornbluth was, I wanted to put him on John's radar. John, had you read CM Kornbluth before?
I had not. This was brand new for me.
Yep, and that was part of my mission because I wanted to have somebody who was new to him, but I thought would be like, holy shit, I now need to read this guy. So CM Kornbluth, we're going to go through a little bit about his history, who he was, and then we'll come back around to the story. He was born July 2nd, 1923. He grew up in uptown Manhattan neighborhood, but did spend a little bit of time in Chicago with his family. I'm not entirely certain like how the Chicago thing happened, but it's funny because every once in a while you'll see Fred Paul mention about, he specifically mentioned that CM Kornbluth was returning from Chicago when he first talked to him about the idea behind the Little Black Bag. So there's a lot of books that you can get a lot of background on CM Kornbluth, and I have a stack of them right here. And they're ones, especially The Futurians by Damon Knight. Cora, I'm assuming you've read this one.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a Damon Knight's history of the science fiction writers of New York who formed a club in the 30s and hung out together and became the powerhouses of science fiction. So he covers Asimov, Blish, Kornbluth, Judith Merrill, Paul, Don Wollheim, lots of Jewish writers here. Some secular, some practicing, but that's part of the story here. One of the best sources of CM Kornbluth information is Fred Paul's introduction to The Best of CM Kornbluth. This is my copy of it, but you can get it in a mass paperback from the 70s as well. And of course, his short stories are incredible. So, and this one is the stories are chosen by Fred Paul. Fred Paul and Kornbluth, of course, wrote two classic novels together, The Space Merchants and Search the Sky. So Fred Paul's own autobiography, The Way the Future Was, also has a lot of talking about CM Kornbluth in it.
But Paul also lived a really, really long time. I think he died in, what was it, 2012 and so on. He was over 90. And he is also actually a fellow Hugo winner for best fan writer.
Right. He started off
for a blog, and not actually that far removed from me. It's not like he won in the 50s or so on. He won in the 2000.
Oh, yeah, because
fairly late, because he wrote a blog.
Because he wrote a blog and he wasn't working anymore, so he was eligible after years of being an editor, publisher, and novelist for the Fan Word. Yes, that's right. I forgot about that. So Kornbluth was a member of the Futurians as a teenager. His first story that he sold a lot of stories initially to different zines that the Futurians put out themselves, including Stirring Science Stories, which is very important for my research, but I'll get to. I have an issue back there on the shelf of, here, let me roll back. You can see Stirring Science Stories from August 1941. This is the first science fiction magazine bought by young Philip K. Dick in Berkeley, California. Not that this actual issue, but, you know, one of them. And there's a story in here by someone named S.D. Grossman. That's CM Kornbluth under another name. The reason why they were writing under pseudonyms is they didn't have enough stories to go around, so all the Futurians would write under like 6 different names. So sometimes they would have 2 different stories in an issue or more, And S.D. Grossman and CM Kornbluth wrote many stories for Stirring Science Stories. And his first published story when he was 19 years old was a story called The Rocket of 1955, which is a classic. And it's also the first story in the best of CM Kornbluth. And he gets some serious stuff right about the space race. He also wrote a moonshot novel in the 40s called Takeoff, which I have on the shelf back there, but I'm not going to take it off the shelf right now. I've already rolled around enough. However, one of the other S.D. Grossman stories in another issue of Stirring Science Stories was a story called Dead Center. And Dead Center is one of the stories that Philip K. Dick gave credit to as one of the early stories that inspired him to want to write science fiction. And so we are eventually going to do an entire episode of the PKD Hangout dedicated to Dead Center. So keep your eye out for that if you're interested in more CM Kornbluth coverage, because eventually we're going to do that. We did talk about Dead Center and read Dead Center for Professor David Gill's online PKD class a couple years ago. And so we've already kind of talked about it. It's a great story. But coincidentally, another Futurian, Judith Merrill, had a story called Dead Center, which was famous as well because it was it was one of the few science fiction stories chosen for the best American short stories of the 50s. And alongside a bunch of mainstream stories, Judith Merrill's story Dead Center actually made it into the best American short stories. So, yeah, there's his child, CM Kornbluth's childhood. I don't know a ton about, but he was already a Futurian. He was already writing science fiction when he was drafted to fight in World War II. And he was a machine gunner at the Battle of the Bulge. And this is important to note because Little Black Bag as a story was really written only 6 years after he was at the Battle of the Bulge, machine gunning Nazis. So, like, that's a really interesting fact to kind of put into this guy's life because he only lived to be 34 years old. He didn't make it very far. Some interesting things about his time. Some interesting things about him being a teenager was the Futurians had a house they called the Tower, or an apartment that they called the Tower because it was high up in this apartment building, and they were all just a slight bit older than Kornbluth, so they were all out on their own. And so a lot of times he would come and hang out on weekends with the Futurians when he was like not quite as old as them. And one interesting thing that I read in the Futurians was that he never had money, and he was like one of the brokest ones, and they used to pay him to do the dishes at the apartment where the Futurians hung out, because the dishes would pile up and they'd pay CM Kornbluth to do it. Now, some other things to know about him is that he had a reputation for being like lightning fast on the typewriter, that he wrote a huge amount of words. And when you start looking at S.D. Grossman, Jordan Park, Simon Eisner, he had like 6 different pen names. And one kind of success that CM Kornbluth had that a lot of other science fiction writers didn't have is that he had mainstream success writing political thrillers, writing crime thrillers. And we were just talking before we started recording, I found there's one called what was it called? Naked Storm, which is a crime novel set on a train that gets snowed into the Donner Pass in modern day of that time, the 50s, or it would have been the 40s, I guess. But he also wrote political thrillers about like dictators like communist dictators winning elections. all kinds of like interesting things. And if you look at, for example, Philip K. Dick was never able to publish any of his mainstream novels until after he died and became famous. And a lot of his contemporaries would write one-off crime novels, like Charles Beaumont's The Intruder is an example. Some of these, Lee Brackett, of course, had a bunch of hard-boiled novels. So, but what's interesting about CM Kornbluth is, well, we have a Matheson crime novel, we have a Lee Brackett crime novel, we have a bunch of these crime novels. Those are still genre. Which is interesting is like with CM Kornbluth is some of the things like the crime or the political thrillers are really interesting. And he was kind of leaning towards, he was getting paid more money to write those than the science fiction. So one of the things Fred Paul talked about in the introduction of The Best of Kornbluth was that he had kind of said he was leaning in the direction of writing more of those because it was more lucrative. He wrote two science fiction novel or a couple science fiction novels, including The Syndicate, which is about the mafia taking over the entire country, which is a really interesting concept because it's kind of prophetic for what's happening today in our country.
I was actually just about to say that exact thing. It's like, oh, so he's writing about 2026.
Yeah, exactly. And that's called The Syndic, I think is the name of that novel. I have it. I just haven't read it. I will have to read it soon. And it was in a sci-fi masterwork series, so it's highly respected. And of course, he wrote the two classics with Fred Paul, and especially The Space Merchants is known for, it's an anti-capitalist like science fiction novel, and it's considered one of the most hilarious science fiction novels. Cora, I'm sure you've read The Space Merchants, right?
Yes, I think that was the first Kornbluth I read.
Yeah. Space Merchants is a hilarious read. It's really ahead of its time. And I know specifically like Philip K. Dick makes reference to it in his outline for Ubik, and saying that he doesn't want anything as directly hilarious as The Space Merchants, is like specifically like he wrote that into the outline. And he said something like, don't fall into making fun of your characters like The Space Merchants. And specifically was referencing that. It was interesting. So on that note, The Little Black Bag is early in his well, he didn't have a very long career because he died when he was 34. Okay. So
I think it would be right about in the middle of his career, I guess.
Yeah. And it's obviously it's in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, so it's respected, but it's also been adapted for television twice as an episode of Tales of Tomorrow, only 2 years after the story was published. And that is available on YouTube. You can watch that. I watched it on Friday. It's great. It's a little harder to find the Night Gallery episode, but it was adapted by Rod Serling himself for the Night Gallery. So, the version from 1952 is pretty faithful, actually. It makes the doctor has a wife who's very dastardly in the TV adaptation, and but it's mostly set in like 1 or 2 rooms. It's 1952, so but
I mean, this one would be easy to adapt because it doesn't require a lot of special effects, which would have been expensive and sometimes also pretty much impossible or nigh impossible. There are no aliens. It has very limited settings. You only have basically a few rooms and an alley. So I can see why they adapted it for TV twice.
Yeah. One funny thing about CM Kornbluth too, just personally, is that for some reason he was known for his horrible breath. Is a thing that they talked about in the Futurians, and that he co-wrote a novel with Judith Merrill, who we've talked at late. I've done entire episodes of podcasts about Judith Merrill. Judith Merrill was an amazing writer in this era, and they did write. They wrote another. What was the name of the novel they wrote together? They wrote under the name Cyril Judd. Was the what they wrote under, and they wrote. Let's see. But anyways, one of the jokes is that she bought him a toothbrush and toothpaste and gave it to him because she was like, Cyril, come on. Your teeth are awful. But they used to joke that he would talk like this because everyone was like shying away from his breath, and which is a really weird thing to note, but it's literally 2 paragraphs of the Futurians is devoted to his breath, which is I find very interesting. But one thing is everyone respected the hell out of him as a writer, and a lot of people considered CM Kornbluth to be one of the best writers in the Futurian crew. Of course, Asimov would become the most famous and have like the widest success in his lifetime. Of course, we don't need to litigate all the gross Asimov stuff now. It's out there, but we're here to talk about CM Kornbluth. So Little Black Bag was published in the and I will
it's a July 1950 issue of Astounding.
Right. And let me
because I looked it up beforehand.
Right. And I'm sorry to show everybody. I should have done this ahead of time. Hold on. Let me get all this stuff up. Now I can share a screen. You guys don't need to see my dirty desktop. Okay. Yes, so here's the Internet Speculative Fiction database for that issue. But let's look at the actual issue. So here's the table of contents. There's 2 novelettes in this issue. Heir Apparent by Lawrence O'Donnell, which is, of course...
Yeah. Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore.
Right, but this particular story actually was entirely a C.L. Moore story.
Yes, Lawrence O'Donnell is usually... if it's Louis Patriot, it's usually either equal or more Kuttner, and Lawrence O'Donnell is often mainly or more C.L. Moore.
Yeah. This novella, Heir Apparent, would later go on to be expanded into the novel Judgment Night, which I have here. And of course, I have to point out C.L. Moore, Catherine Lucille Moore, is Indiana Hoosier. And I always have to point that out, that she came from Indiana. By the time this was published, she was married to Henry Kuttner and living in L.A. But this novella is Heir Apparent. If you haven't read Judgment Night or Heir Apparent, it is about it's a technocratic authoritarian novel about an AI dictator, basically, on another planet. The planet is called Irricon, and it's a pretty forward-thinking story for 1950. So highly recommended. It's also equally good. This would have been
pretty much every Kuttner Moore, or also solo stories by both of them are highly recommended.
Yeah. Yes, both Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore were both amazing authors in their own right. As a married couple, they were a pretty amazing team. We've done them on this this series because we covered their story from this book is Mimsy Were the Burrow-Groves, which is of course a classic. Under the name
I was on that.
Yes, that's right. You were on that episode, so we forgot one. Yes, so we've gone at length about C.L. Moore and Henry Kuttner. They were completely amazing. Kuttner, of course, cut his teeth on Weird Tales as well. But
C.L. Moore also, of course, got started in Weird Tales.
Right. And so these two stories, the Little Black Bag and Heir Apparent, would definitely be the headliners of this issue. I don't think the other short stories, I don't I know Eric Frank Russell a little bit, but I don't really know these other three stories.
Interesting that no, I think no, it's Edwin, or is it Edna? Because I thought no, his name's Edwin. Because I thought there was another female author, I was absolutely unaware of. But no, his name's Edwin.
Now, the main headliner of this issue and the cover story is Robert Heinlein's essay on shooting Destination Moon, and that is the cover. So, this essay about Heinlein, actually, I think he wrote the screenplay for Destination Moon. So, and Destination Moon, of course, is a pre-moonshot, like, science fiction movie about going to trying to do a realistic take of going to the moon from 1950. So that was the big deal of the issue. And of course, one of the elephants in the room, the editor of this here story would have been John W. Campbell, who of course is pretty notorious these days. But of course, we're not, we've done John W. Campbell on this series as well with Twilight. So if you want to hear commentary on John W. Campbell, that's where you're going to get that.
We should also give a shout out to the assistant editor, listed here as C. Tarrant. Her name was Kate. It was a woman. Her name was Kate Tarrant. She was at Astounding before Campbell came in, and Campbell came in what was it, 1937. And she was there after he died. So she's pretty much spent her entire working life at Astounding. She was, she was kind of, and I actually think that the story refers to her because she was kind of notorious for editing out any hint of impropriety from the stories. And although they were all scared of her, all the Astounding writers. And then one day she said to them, I personally don't give a fuck what you write in your stories, but children read those too. So they knew that she could actually swear if she wanted to. I've never been able to find a photo of her or anything, which is a pity. And if we still had Retro Hugos, I would have pushed for her to be nominated for a Retro Hugo instead of just Campbell over and over again.
Right. And see, and that, Cora, that's why you're here, to add the because I was going to miss her and I shouldn't have.
Yeah, she's often forgotten, even though she was as important to the magazine as Campbell.
And she was there for decades. So and had already put in quite a bit of work at this time when this story
I mean, she would still be there more than 20 years later. Campbell will die in 1971, and she will outlast him at Astounding.
Yeah, and started in 1937. That's amazing.
She started before Campbell. She was already there when Campbell came in.
In 37. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So she must have been there all her life, pretty much, all her working life. Wow. I think she died sometime in the early or to mid 80s. I forgot. The information is in the book Astounding by Alec Nevala Lee, which has pretty much tells the story of astounding science fiction, John W. Campbell, and its most important writers, Robert A. Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and L. Ron Hubbard, who is now famous for things other than his writing.
Right. And Alec has been on this series as well. He was on the Twilight episode, and
that's of course, that would be perfect for Alec because it's because he is the Campbell expert out there.
Yeah, he was also on the Nightfall episode as well. So okay, so let's look at hold on. I gotta get. Oh, it's funny because my
I actually have otherwise I can share because I also, but I think you have to switch it because I have it open open on my computer, I have just this story. That's
Oh yeah, so here, yeah, I want
that's
to go
that's
back. Here's
Moore.
the heir apparent. This is how it appeared in the magazine. And it's, yeah, I can't, my controller for the internet archive is below my Zoom control, so I have to scroll through this way. But yes, so this is we're getting a little peek into the whole issue. It's my wife is trying to crawl underneath the screen to not be on camera. Sorry, I'm outing her on that. Okay, so let's look at how Little Black Bag appeared in the issue. Here's how it looked. And the tagline was, the normal progress of a technology produces simpler and simpler gadgets involving more and more complex laws, and of course, requiring less and less of the user. Okay, so now we're here. So Cora, you've read this story before, right? You many times,
Yes.
I'm assuming. Yes.
I've read it before. I'm just trying to. It must have been in some kind of general anthology, because I don't have the best of CM Kornbluth. Probably
Okay.
should remedy it eventually.
Probably here in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. So I want to start on getting reactions to the story by getting John's reaction, because this was his first time reading CM Kornbluth. And maybe do you have any idea what the story was going to be about, John?
Let me start off by saying that I am so far outclassed by the two of you that I came into this feeling confident and now feel extremely insecure. But no, I had no clue what I was going to read. I didn't have any insight or guesses, and that is partially, exactly what it sounds like. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I will say that is kind of on brand for me. I try to go into any media that I'm about to encounter as blind as possible. I like to. I I have a surprising resilience to being spoiled to media, and a sort of delicious resiliency to inside baseball. Being a writer, being a publisher, being an editor, like that can sometimes cause you to think about writing or reading a certain way. And I am beautifully incapable of bringing an analytical mind when of an editor when I'm reading for pleasure. So no, I went in completely blind. It was a delightful story. There are several beats that brought me a lot of joy with their humanity, which is something I'm always looking for when I'm reading, is how well the author actually taps into real human reaction and experience. And this story is full of real characters, with the exception of one character that was, in my opinion, otherworldly. But yeah, a delightful story to read. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I don't know that I would say that it was surprising. I think that the road it laid out was pretty straightforward and easy to follow and kind of see what was around the bend, but that didn't detract from the enjoyability of the story itself.
Well, it started, I guess, as an idea years before he actually wrote it. that he had said something to Fred Paul in a conversation about, like, I want to do a story about a doctor's toolkit, like, being sent back in time. And then Campbell had approached Kornbluth saying, like, hey, you haven't written for Astounding in a while, like, do you have anything? And he said he didn't have anything. And then it was Paul that said, hey, why don't you write that that time travel medical bag story? And it's also kind of a cool story of how, like, these friends, like, are, I love the idea of them, like, hey, remember that medical bag story that you wanted to write? Write that one. So hey, John, you don't have to be in our class on knowing the history. So we wanted to
Thank God.
You probably know a lot more about obscure Jewish mythology than either David or I do. So you would totally outclass us if we were to discuss this.
Yeah.
Also, about the story, this is in a context, there was a kind of mini trend at the time about stories about everyday futuristic technology being sent back in time and causing havoc. A very famous one is, of course, Mimsy vs. Balgroves by Kuttner and Moore, which we discussed, which is also a Hall of Fame story, an excellent story, came out in, I think it's 1943, and even earlier we had another really excellent Moore and Kuttner story, the Twonky, where where a robot ends up with a family from the future ends up with a family who mistake him for a TV or radio or something. And also there was a trend of stories in the 1940s mostly, this is a bit later, of haunted machinery stories where there were also in weird tales they were basically stories where some kind of machinery is haunted or enchanted, and
I can't tell you how many stories I've rejected.
It's a bulldozer or something like that. It's all sorts of things and things. There's Ellison V. Harding, who wrote for Weird Tales, wrote several of those. Theodore Sturgeon. So yes, there's a context for stories about weird weird or futuristic machinery wreaking havoc.
John, you were about to say how many stories?
Sorry, John.
No problem. I was gonna say, you don't know how many stories I've rejected of haunted GPSs. It is the
There's a lot of those apparently. Yeah.
It's I have seen submission calls that outright say, do not send me any stories about haunted GPSs.
That's funny. Now I want to read an anthology of terrible haunted GPS stories. Well, it's interesting too, because the concept is very simple, and I think that part of what makes it so effective is that it is kind of done very simply, right? And he's not, it's not necessarily the most original idea in the world, but it's all on the execution. And it's interesting too, because I personally think for Kornbluth, I don't think this is his best short story personally. It's funny to me that this made the Science Fiction Hall of Fame, and I know we do this sometimes, Cora, with for those of us who are really well read on this stuff, talking about, like, is this the best story to represent this author for the Hall of Fame? And I don't know about you, but to me, Kornbluth's best short story is The Marching Morons. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, because you said you don't have the best Kornbluth, but are you?
I'm familiar with that one, and let's say part of The Marching Morons also is alluded to in this story.
Yes, and for people who don't
know,
the
basic concept is alluded to.
Yeah, The Marching Morons is basically a 1950s science fiction version of Idiocracy, but CM Kornbluth wrote it in the 50s, right? And Idiocracy is basically a 1950s science fiction version of Idiocracy, but CM Kornbluth wrote it in the 50s, right? And Idiocracy is basically a 1950s science fiction version of Idiocracy, but CM Kornbluth wrote it in the 50s, right? And so if you want to talk about prophetic or talking about like the dumbing down of politics and all that, um, the Marching Morons is a story that's basically about how technology is going to turn us all into a bunch of dummies. And he wrote it in the 50s. And to me, the Marching Morons is the best CM Kornbluth story. That being said, the Little Black Bag is pretty great. And so is Dead Center. And it's funny because Dead Center is not even in the best of Kornbluth, for whatever reason. And but if but the Marching Morons is in here, and so is Two Dooms is a great one. And so I am due to reread or to I've read a bunch of the stories, but I've never read the best of Kornbluth straight from top to bottom. So I will be doing that this year. That is on my list of things to do this year. So I don't know. Do you have one that you like more, Cora?
This isn't probably the one I would have chosen, so it's a good one. I think really the Marching Morons is probably the one that should. But I mean, there's a lot of cases in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame where you think, why this story and not that story?
Right. Well, the Marching Morons definitely. If I can't make it clear enough, I think everyone should read that one. But okay, so before we get a little bit into the plot, John, I'm wondering your reaction. Obviously, I wanted to put Kornbluth on your radar because he's Jewish. How do you feel like from what we're saying and what you've got out of reading this one story? Have we sparked your interest in Kornbluth? Are you going to dig deeper, or what's your reaction to this, to hearing about this guy?
Yeah. I am dismayed that he was mostly known for his bad breath. But
Just to his friends.
yeah, yeah. I think that to me, I enjoyed the story a lot. I would absolutely enjoy reading more of his work, right? I did not at all pick up on the reason why you wanted me on this episode. Like completely ignorant of that part of it. But once you
Fine.
mentioned it, I thought like, oh yeah, no, that's obvious.
Yeah.
This is pretty Jewish actually.
Right. In one of the reasons why and I do believe I actually mentioned CM Kornbluth to you the first time we were talking in at BizarroCon, because I remember you and I had a discussion about Jewish science fiction writers, and I'm pretty sure at that time I said, "Oh, buddy, you got to read Judith Merril and CM Kornbluth." And the thing about Judith Merril is Judith Merril, and they did write books together and they were friends. Judith Merril was like, she grew up in a very secular Jewish household, but CM Kornbluth and Don Wollheim did not. They were both bar mitzvahed and went through the whole deal. Now, CM Kornbluth's family is Polish Jewish immigrants to New York. And so his father was a veteran in World War One and a tailor, and then his role as being a machine gunner at the Battle of the Bulge too. He did win a Bronze Star, by the way, CM Kornbluth. And so it's not just that he was like there. I mean, like like a lot of authors, a lot of science fiction and horror authors in that era ended up in the war. If you're talking about, and most interesting, probably Matheson and Vonnegut, who were on two different sides of the bombing of Dresden, right? Vonnegut was on the ground, and Matheson served in the
I
bombing.
didn't know that about Matheson. I'm also not sure if I wanted to know that because obviously I have pretty strong feelings about particularly bomber crews. Having had family members. Also, my grandmother is from, and I have met a survivor of the Dresden bombing who was a teenager at the time, and my grandmother, she was not directly from Dresden, but from a town a little bit outside. But she saw it happening. She was happening. So yeah, I have. So yeah, I didn't, but I will still enjoy Matheson's work. And
well, I think Matheson was not a big fan of war after having served in it.
Most people actually aren't.
Yeah, exactly.
But can't necessarily. But you can't necessarily avoid being drafted. Even though they did, Asimov, for example, did a lot to avoid being drafted and then wound up at the Navy Yard with Heinlein and Heinlein, who basically who was always this gung-ho type and had a long history of military service in the family, and because he was too sick, he basically wound up sitting in the Navy Yard and testing equipment.
Well, and it should be noted too that Matheson actually wrote a novel about his war experience called The Beardless Warriors. It's one of his non-genre books, and is an incredible it's an incredible war novel. And unlike Vonnegut, who went way science fiction with his commentary with it, Matheson's is a pretty straightforward book. But it's recommended. I've read it twice, so it has some of Matheson's most kind of dialed in prose. It's pretty fascinating, and he'll be the next story in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. So, but anyways, back to the little black bag. Okay, so let's talk about the character of Dr. Full. If you look at the illustration that's in the let's see if I can. Yeah, the illustration in the story is, kind of like this, drunkard like guy down on his luck, and he ends up with the bag. One of the things about Dr. Full for me that's interesting is that I do think the characterization of this character is a huge part of what makes the story real. Now, you highlighted that, John, in your first comments on it. Do you have anything you want to say about the characterization of Dr. Full?
I think that that Dr. Full is, again, just, I hate to be a broken, very, very believable in that those first moments. I chuckled pretty heartily with the sitting on his ass in the alley drinking wine from a broken jug, and then be like, I need to go in, but feeling so content with that warm wine. Like, it was very honest.
Mm-hmm.
And then those moments that kind of pass as the story goes on, where he his first rejection of wine is out of spite, right?
Yeah.
And it almost feels like he turns this corner into altruism purely to prove someone wrong. And as someone who has powered their entire life through proving people wrong, I very deeply identified with that.
Yep. Yeah.
Dr. Full is an amazing character. First of all, the depiction early on of alcoholism and its effects are very, very spot on to. I have alcoholics in my family, including some, basically lots of alcoholics on my mom's side of the family. So yeah, I've seen the sad story. It's spot on. I think. And also Dr. Full, yes, he does a lot of good, but he becomes an altruistic person, but as Lon said, it's out of spite, and also he wants to prove this medical ethics commission, which revoked his license, actually rightly revoked it because he was scamming patients, as we later learn. He wants to prove them wrong, so he becomes this utterly angelic, wonderful doctor. And even when he says he wants to hand over the bag for the good of all humanity. But basically, what he wants is he wants recognition. He wants the recognition. Dr. Full is actually a good person, and he's a noble person, and he's actually dreaming about getting maybe a kind of medal or something like that. So he is he's not exactly he's a kind of narcissistic, selfish person. He also does a lot of good because he finds he ends up with his bag, and he's not the worst person in the story. But then actually this is also interesting. None of the people in the story are actually good people. Good people, except maybe the journalist, but no one really is there's no good person in this story.
And by the way, Dr. Full was played in the Night Gallery episode by Burgess Meredith.
That must have been. I must watch that one if I can find it. It's these things are hard to find here because these anthology shows, especially the science fiction fantasy ones like Twilight Zone and so on, never aired. At least the original versions never aired in Germany, so they're they're kind of hard to come by here.
Yeah, the 50s version, he has a wife that wants him to go out there and start making money again, and then
so did they replace Angie with a wife, or is Angie still in the story?
Replaced with the wife. And
yes.
Yeah, and
50s would have been too shocking, probably, that this old doctor in his 60s has this pretty young thing he's working with.
Yeah. And one thing that's hilarious about the 50s TV version is that Dr. Full in the 50s version he always has a cigarette in his mouth. And so when he does the miracle cure of the neighbor kid who comes in, he's like literally has a cigarette hanging out of his mouth in the kid's face while he's like trying to save the kid's life. And it's
the 50s were another time. Also, yes. The whole early on, I'm sorry, I think I have to sneeze.
Do it.
It's not coming out.
But that adaptation of Little Black Bag was 2 years after the story was written in 52. So
yes, I think he probably had some experience at being an immigrant, because a rundown immigrant neighborhood he describes early on also feels very much like rundown, like a real run, like someplace he knew, even if he didn't grow up in the really bad. But he must have known these immigrant neighborhoods in New York.
Yeah. And I'm worried that the TV version is going to infect my brain, because I literally finished reading it and then watched, like an hour later, I watched the Tales of Tomorrow, which I have a hard time not saying it without saying Tales of Tomorrow, because that's like literally how they say it. So if I get something wrong, because I'm thinking of the TV version, but one of the things that's, this idea that the equipment's smart enough to know that if it's being used for ill purposes, that like it basically turns to nothing. That's kind of very pre-Twilight. This was pre-Twilight Zone, but it's very Twilight Zone. And
when you said there was a TV adaptation, I thought, it's probably Twilight Zone.
Well, and Moore and Kuttner,
it usually is.
Yeah, Moore and Kuttner had an episode of the Twilight Zone, and a couple. It's funny because Serling was definitely on the genre stories and was reading these. So I'm not sure. I think the reason why it didn't end up being a Twilight Zone was because of Tales of Tomorrow was so soon before that. But Night Gallery, you're talking, it's been to 1970, so it's almost 20 years later. So I think that's why Serling waited to do Little Black Bag for Night Gallery and didn't do it for Twilight Zone. But I love the twist. I love the ending. I love the idea that this technology has some kind of awareness for how it's being used. I think that's one of the things that makes it smart and interesting and a cool story. And I like the kind of moral point of view that, and that's one of the things that's cool about Kornbluth. If you look at his science fiction, if you look at Syndic, if you look at Marching Morons, if you look at the things that he's doing, like he's trying to write thoughtful political science fiction. It has message, it has heart, it has and intelligence. It's like, and the fact that he never lived to be 35 years old, right?
He's one of the great losses, I think, of the genre. People who just died too soon. Kornbluth, Robert E. Howard, H. Beam Piper, who made
Charles
it to 60s,
Beaumont.
But these are the people where I also always wonder where else, and Henry Kuttner, of course, also died way too young. There's also the people where I always think, okay, what stories and what novels did we miss? Where might their careers have gone? How much more might we have gotten?
Yeah, and definitely Charles Beaumont.
He died of a heart condition, didn't he? I think I remember that it was a heart condition, and he didn't take the medication because it interfered with the writing, and so he died at 34.
Yeah, and I would add Charles Beaumont to that list, of course.
Yes,
of writers that died too young, and what's interesting is with Beaumont, if you saw pictures or if you saw, like, there was build up to Beaumont, so they kind of knew he was sick, and so he got some of his affairs in line and actually finished some work while he was sick. But CM Kornbluth died very suddenly. And I do think for the Futurians, a lot of them saw him as like the most heartbreaking and tragic of like the what if. But you're right.
He would probably have been one of the really, really great ones if he had lived longer.
Yeah, and he was perfect to transition into the new wave as well.
Another one who died too soon, little known, Rosa George Brown. She wrote some really excellent stories she was a Hugo finalist in the late 50s, wrote some excellent stories, and 2 novels, 2.5 novels. One was a collaboration, and also I think she died in her 40s of cancer. So another one gone too soon.
Yeah. Okay. So overall, John, your experience in getting to the end of this story and seeing where it went, which we kind of got to watch you do that on Zoom. But when it got to the end and you saw what it was doing, what did you think overall of what he did with the story?
I think that it was again, it's part of what made it a very Jewish story to me. Was the turnaround of I'm gonna call it a face turn. We're wrestling now. He does this face turn of legitimate doctoring, and to your point, maybe it wasn't for altruistic reasons, although the action was altruistic. And if we're going to like dive into Talmudic arguments, there's a heavy argument between intention and what actually happens. And in Judaism, intention is incredibly important. It can offset, the popular phrase you always hear is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that is kind of counter to Jewish thought. And so it's interesting to see someone doing really great things, helping people, not just helping people, but while he wants recognition, he doesn't go the cosmetic surgery route, which Angie is pushing for at first, because not actually helpful. It, doesn't, well, knowing what I know now, I could argue that cosmetic surgery is extremely helpful for people's mental health, but it can also be extremely harmful for people's mental health. I'm going on a tangent. I apologize. But
Tangents are welcome.
when I saw the end payoff, the incoming argument, and the untimely demise of Dr. Full kind of on the horizon, I was a little bit sad, but I was reminded of this is going to seem out of left field, but I was reminded of Jurassic Park. When I was a kid and I was watching Jurassic Park with my dad, and Dr. Hammond dies at the end, my dad told me that in fiction, even if a character is good, if they've done something bad, they will be forced to pay for it. And so when Dr. Full gets his little aggressive back pat from Angie, I was reminded of him walking away from the girl who cut herself in the alley. I don't know if that was intentional or if that's me reading my own, experience.
The girl is Angie's sister, which of course he doesn't know at the time.
Yeah.
But yes, he walked away from this little girl in the alley, and she was, and if he had treated her right away, he would never have gotten sick, and never. And if he hadn't come across the bag and helped the little girl, it's quite possible that she might have died of sepsis or might have lost the arm or something like that, because things like that might have lost use of the arm, because things like that happened all the time. All the time. Antibiotics they were invented during World War II, so antibiotics were very new, and we don't even know if a hospital catering to poor immigrants would have, or clinic would have had access to them. So it's quite possible without Dr. Full and the little black bags, this little girl would have died. A little girl who, by the way, if we say this story is set in 1950 when it was published, then this little girl would be still around and would be 79 today.
Always wild for me to think about that.
Yeah.
I do not like thinking about time. And then, of course, almost immediately after, the next paragraph, nearly, Angie I almost said took her own life, but she didn't. She was killed by the black bag, by her overconfidence, by her own greed. It's very. I tend to read a lot of books that are very morally ambiguous, right? I traipse through horror as a genre as my main literary sustenance, and horror is rife with no one getting comeuppance, with evil winning, with open endings that are open to interpretation. But this story is wrapped up in a nice little bow. The Dr. Full paid for his own hubris and his own actions. Angie paid for hers, and the black bag rots at the end.
And that is a big difference between the fiction of that era and the fiction that we have today. Is ambiguity was not really a thing in fiction of that era. Is the editors and writers at the time were more into like having a neat little ending, and as evidenced by the Twilight Zone, which is funny because I know as a writer who grew up watching the Twilight Zone, I'm much more inclined to having like an ending that's kind of like that's old school then a lot of horror fiction that I read, and I'm not sure. I mean, John, as an editor, you see a lot of these, but I see a lot of stories where I'm like, where stories just kind of fizzle out, and they're supposed to have ambiguity, and that's supposed to be the thing. And
kind of twist ending was of this isn't really a twist ending, but these very neat endings, either poetic justice endings or twist endings, were of course very much a thing of the science fiction and also fantasy and horror of the golden age.
Absolutely. And so I see a lot in the modern times. There's a lot of times where I'll just get to the end of stories and be like, okay, I guess that's it. I guess that's it. Yeah.
So they kind of tend to peter out these days.
I don't know.
And also, I mean,
I get complaints about one of the books I wrote, which I think is one of better books personally, but I end it with the protagonist staring up as the giant monster emerges and realizing that she's becoming a monster, and I end it. And I get so many comments, it's like, it's just petered out. He just ended abruptly. And so it was very intentional on my part, but readers did not feel that way, right?
Yeah.
And so now whenever I see people complaining about those endings, I'm like, I wonder if the author did that intentionally and failed in a way, or like who's the asshole here? Is it me or is it the reader?
There's times where it works. Like I think The Mist is an example of an ending. I just use that one as like, you see the difference between King's ending and Darabont's ending, and Darabont gave a Golden Age ending to, or a Twilight Zone ending to what King gave as an ambiguous ending, right? And I think both work for different ways, but I think The Mist is a prime example of one where you can see both styles of endings. And spoiler alert for The Mist, apparently I should have said that. But I just take and assume people have seen it. But all right, so I want to start getting rolled up here a little bit, but so are there things about this story that you think I missed that you think are foundational for science fiction, Cora? Because it was a science fiction Hall of Fame story. I do think it's worthy of this book, even if I think that Kornbluth has one that I might think is better. It's definitely worthy of the Hall of Fame, right? I mean,
it is. I mean, it's a good story. And interestingly, rereading it, I realized, for example, that I had blanked out the entire newspaper interlude, which is of course also just fascinating about the way newspapers worked in the pre-digital era. Probably also why I blanked it out, because the first time I read it, I probably didn't even understand what was going on, except there's some because I didn't know what these people were actually doing there, because that kind of newspaper had already died by that time. And also, and yes, then there's a bit which I find a bit problematic, because of course we do see which we didn't talk about, we do see the people in the future, and the doctor who lost his bag and why he lost it. And basically there's a kind of hilarious satire here about academics and who are kind of clueless people, and that the assistants are actually the smart ones, which anybody who has and they're also, and that's credentialed people. Dr. Gillis and Dr. Hemingway are basically taking the credit for the achievement of the assistants, who are smarter than them, but who are just Mike and Al. And there's also a bit about, yes, nowadays these college students are stupid. They can barely read. They can and and all those weird credentials and weird degrees which are worthless, and like I forgot what it was, PhD and something ridiculous. But at any rate, this sounds so very much like today, and it's 1950, so it's more than
I was going to say
76 years ago, and they were going on about the same things as today. And
boy, this is kind of Kornbluth thought 76 years ago people were getting dumber.
Yes, and of course, there is a thing about people getting dumber, which is also in the Marching Morons, and played out there. Here it's a bit problematic because there's a thing about, yes, it basically says mental subnormals are outbreeding normal and supernormals, and well, that supernormals are still not willing to cross the bridge, and this troubled me a bit because I thought, like, dude, you're Jewish. It's 1950.
Yeah.
You were a World War II veteran. You were at the Battle of the Bulge. You know where that sort of shit leads. If
Right.
you say, like, the wrong people. I mean, the Nazis' first victims before they started killing Jewish people, they started killing disabled people, and first they started sterilizing them to make sure that they couldn't breed, and then they started killing them. And my mom had a cousin. She was the same age. She would have been 3 so she was born in 1942, so she would have been 3 at the end of World War II, and she was disabled due to a meningitis infection, which at the time was badly treatable. And the mother, my great aunt, she kept her child daughter alive, so the last few years of World War II and the Nazi era, but basically she had some inkling what happened if you gave if these people came to take your child, because they didn't tell you we're going to kill your kid. They said, we're going to take them to a place where they will be well taken care of, and so on. And she must have had, and someone must have warned her, but people also had some inklings that something was wrong, that all these people suddenly died in these places where they were well taken care of. So she basically refused any help, even after World War II. When it would have been better. When someone came like, we're sending your daughter to school and so on, she always said no. She basically locked herself and her daughter into her house, and barely let the daughter was allowed to go out later on because the mother was too ill to go. Which, as a kid, always was like, why is she locking herself and her daughter in? Why doesn't she go out? Yes, okay, she's disabled, but disabled people exist. Who cares? But
she had the trauma of the.
Yeah, she was this woman was so traumatized. She kept her daughter alive, but she pretty much locked her in for the rest of the mother died in 1992, and the daughter was then sent to a care home because no one could take care of her. So they lived quite far away from the rest of the family. And there at the care home, she suddenly blossomed because she was fairly. She would have been, she was 50, she was still fairly healthy, and she liked helping people, and all the old people in the care home loved her. So she had a kind of she had a happy life anyway, sort of. She was not unhappy, but I remember that I was literally adult and they were both dead when I realized, that's why she locked her daughter in.
Well, yeah, and he's obviously.
So yeah, sorry about the tangent.
No, that was fascinating.
That's why I feel that's why I respond quite strongly to this eugenics stuff in there. Also, not sure if that was really Kornbluth or if the overly eugenic stuff was Campbell speaking, because some of this was like, there's Campbell coming in.
Yeah, that could have been Campbell coming in too, for sure.
Because I've become quite skilled at detecting. Campbell had to get into this.
Yeah, and
also,
for people who don't know, that Campbell, as the editor of this, was very pro eugenics, and
he was super pro eugenics, and he's been called a fucking fascist, and he kind of was, even though he was against the Nazis, but that's not always the same thing.
Yeah,
and of course
but Campbell, what we should note is that he often would editorialize in other writers' stories. He would like add little bits and pieces, tiny little bits that would make it in there, and sometimes authors caught it, sometimes they didn't, and that sometimes you
can
see parts that
tell.
You
find
can tell.
You can.
And sometimes those parts would get excised when they get into single author collections and things like that. And so you sometimes see different versions that were going on, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why Campbell only bought one PKD story, and I know that Phil was like worried about Campbell like messing with his stories, and
Lots of
famously,
people didn't like Campbell. Lee
yeah,
Brackett, Edmund Hamilton, PKD. Just look at who almost never published with Campbell, even though they were top tier
yeah.
writers. Those are the ones who didn't get along with him.
Well, and PKD had a really hilarious revenge on an editor once who changed his story. I would tell this story, but there was a editor, Ted White, who when he published the original
He's
novella,
actually still around. Ted
yeah,
White is still alive.
I know, but Ted White changed the ending to Abraham Lincoln Simulacra, the story that eventually became We Can Build You, and he completely changed the ending, rewrote the ending, and so like Phil was supposed to be sending off an author photo for the British edition of Man in the High Castle, and he sent a picture of Ted White as the author photo, and so it was right after that whole thing had happened, and as a joke, he sent this picture of Ted White for his author photo for an edition of Man in the High Castle, which is hilarious. But anyways,
also about the newspaper interludes, there's a thing
yeah.
with this. I think this is a reference to Kate Tarrant because at one point they changed chest to breast, no, breast to chest, because breast is too sexual. They changed it to chest in the newspaper. In this newspaper column it's a column by a journalist who investigates what she thinks are medical quackery. Also a problem here, and she runs into Dr. Fowl, who is not a quack but the real deal, and who even cures her tuberculosis, her encapsulated tuberculosis, and her lung scarring, which of course tuberculosis was a massive problem, especially in immigrant neighborhoods and so on at the time.
Yeah. John, do you have any final thoughts on the little black bag?
I just want to I feel intimidated, but what I want to say is that it's such a fantastically paced story. And that's one thing that is likely to endure me to your writing, to make me kind of fall in love with you, is if I don't have time to get bored, and if every few beats there's something that makes me have a reaction, whether it's laughing, which I did many times while during this read, or a little bit of heartache, or makes me think, any of those things. And I think this story does that wonderfully, where there's hardly a beat goes by that feels bloated or non-necessary. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Cool. Cora, last thoughts?
Yeah, well, like we said, it's a great story. I'm not sure if it's the best by Kornbluth, but then Kornbluth was insanely talented. But it's a really excellent story, and also interestingly, then that we have at least two device from the future causes havoc in the present stories in the Science Fiction Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have a haunted machinery one, but
Yeah.
we have Killdozer.
Is Killdozer? No.
Killdozer is a haunted machinery story. That's probably the most famous of the old style ones.
Yeah, it's not in this one.
Okay, Sturgeon, of course, also had so many great stories. It's difficult to decide on just one. Also, Killdozer is pretty long.
Okay.
So it's interesting that we have two of those stories, but yeah, this is a good one. Bit of a problem
it's a
with
good one, and it's very different.
Ainsley.
It's very different from Mimsy as well. Like that, I mean, they have similar setups, but they pay off very differently. And yeah.
Mimsy, of course, has a kind of ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
Which was unusual for the time, but not that uncommon for Kuttner and in particular Moore liked ambiguous endings.
Yeah. John, you would like Kuttner and Moore stuff as well.
So. Oh yes, do read them. They're excellent.
Yeah. And point of trivia about CL Moore that you might be fascinated in, John, is that she worked at a insurance company in Indianapolis in the
Wasn't it a
30s.
bank?
Well, it was a bank at the time, Fletcher Trust. Yeah. But she used to type up stories for other authors for extra money. And so she actually typed the Call of Cthulhu and for submission, and several Conan stories for Robert E. Howard as well. So
I do find that interesting.
Yeah.
They were
very
also
cool.
they were also all corresponding with each other. They were pen pals because they lived in different and
I have a whole
actually,
book here of
yes,
of
actually,
C.L. Moore and Lovecraft letters, which is
yes,
fascinating.
there are some letter collect and also H.P. Lovecraft basically introduced C.L. Moore to Henry Kuttner.
And then they
he
got
kind of
married.
liked. He apparently liked matchmaking, and yeah, that was one case where he was really successful.
Well, and the interesting thing about their relationship too is that they would start and stop in the middle of sentences. One would get up and the other one would sit down at the typewriter and keep going, and it's totally amazing. Like
that is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, she also, that's also why she did continue to, but she pretty much stopped writing science fiction, fantasy, and fantasy. She did do screenwriting for a while, then she remarried and never really wrote again afterwards.
Yeah.
Even after her books came back into print, when suddenly her early stories became fashionable again. But she was done with it. She was done.
But she sometime in the 70s, she was at a conference, and Tessa told us the story about when PKD met CL Moore and how he was like super starstruck and it was cool that I was like, oh wow, you got to stand there while CL Moore and PKD had a conversation. That's just amazing. All right, so
we would be starstruck today to see both of them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a photo from the 1976 Worldcon, where they did some early promotion for Star Wars, and they had Mark Hamill there and some other people, and there's a photo where Mark Hamill and Bill Mumy, who of course is also really famous for Babylon 5, Lost in Space, Twilight Zone, and so on, and Miguel Ferrer, who's of course also really, really famous these days and sadly gone. They are all young men, and they're sitting at the feet of, I think it's Julius Schwartz, they're Kirby, and someone else of the really great old ones, and they're totally starstruck. And nowadays, if you look at this, we are totally starstruck by every single person in this photo.
I know, it's amazing some of the things that, well, and someday some people will be like, oh, look, I got a photo from BizarroCon of John and David talking to each other. So hopefully, but on that note, let's get the folks just so CM Kornbluth. People should definitely read more. Go out there. I will. This year is my intention to read the Syndic and the best of Kornbluth before the end of the year. So look out for. I'll probably do a column for Amazing Stories on that. But so more CM Kornbluth coverage. Cora, how can folks find you and your work?
Yes, well, you can find me anywhere on the internet under my name, Cora Buhlert. That's CoraBuhlert. That will lead you to my blog, my website, my stories, and also my social media. And
I think I see you mostly on Blue Sky.
Yes, I have accounts on all of them, and to basically try to cross post most things, because it's still not, because there's people, every social network has people who are not on any of the others, so you have to stick with all of them, which is kind of annoying because it means posting everything 4 times rather than once. But yes, you can. But if you Google me, you can find me, and And you can also find me at Galactic Journey, which is galacticjourney.org, which is a fanzine like any other. So we talk about science fiction, fantasy, novels, stories, magazines, movies, real world space news, and science news. But we're a fanzine set 55 years in the past. So it's 1971 now, and Lon W. Campbell will finally leave astounding now than analog by that time, feet first later this year, and
That's
and
amazing that you guys are
yes.
covering 71 now, because I remember the first time I connected with Galactic Journey. I think it was before you were on board, but Gideon was doing like 63, I think.
Yeah, I got
So,
on board. I started in 63. Oh well, in journey time it was 63, and now it's 1971.
oh, okay. Yeah. So maybe you were probably there. Okay. Yeah.
I
Well,
I
Gideon's
started
local
in
for me. So I see him at
Yeah, I
things.
know you're both so you know each other because you're both in San Diego,
Yeah.
and I'm on the other
We've
side of the world.
slung books at festivals together before. So yeah. Yeah, great stuff over at Galactic Journey. The 55 years in the past thing is a really clever.
Yeah, we still have Kornbluth is of course gone. He was gone before we got started, but lots of other writers from the golden age. Of course, we're smack in the middle of the new wave now, and we have feminist science fiction coming up. We're having the massive second sword and sorcery boom going on right now. So lots of interesting stuff, and of course, lots of space news and real world
Well,
stuff.
and that's one of the things too, is the new wave. I CM Kornbluth, I think, would have flourished in the new wave. I think he would have been able to write really like radical science fiction. I
Yeah,
think
he
he
would have been only in his late 40s at this point if he had lived. So he would have been really. um, I think actually he would have been one of the greats if he hadn't died so soon.
agreed. And technically he still is. It's just
Yeah.
that he needs people like us, like
That's also why I really hope people should read more Kornbluth, because simply because he died so early, he's a bit in the danger of being forgotten gradually or falling between the cracks.
Yeah.
Unlike other authors who simply lived a lot longer.
Yep. John, where can what work do you want to send people to directly?
Yeah. So you can find me at kaijupoet.com or on social media on any of the sites at kaiju poet. I have, strictly speaking of sci-fi, I have 2 science fiction books, if that's the type of thing you like to read. The one that is currently out is called A Psalm Sung in Spores. And like I said, later this sweet year, we'll have Of Worm and Men, but I have tons of fantasy, tons of horror and urban fantasy. So if you like to read genre fiction, just www.kaijupoet.com. And that's the entirety of it. It's really easy to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us to talk about CM Kornbluth. I'm interested to see where your Kornbluth journey goes. I think the short story collection is definitely a must-have. But and for everyone else out there, you can like, comment, tell us what Kornbluth you like. And next up on the Science Fiction Hall of Fame series is going to be Born of Man and Woman by Richard Matheson. Let me see if I got that title correct. Born of Man and Woman, yes. Which, by the way, was Matheson's first sold science fiction story to the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction. So long before he wrote well, not too long before he wrote I Am Legend. It would have been pretty close to when he wrote I Am Legend. But of course, one of the greatest authors of the 20th century, in my opinion, Richard Matheson, and this classic story from the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. So it was a Tony Boucher purchase story. Very much looking forward to talking about Matheson, and I am not entirely sure who all the gets, but I have talked to Greg Cox about being on the episode, and Greg served as Matheson's last editor in the last like 15 years of his life, so he knew Richard Matheson very well. And Greg is of course an incredible guest. And by the way, Greg just wrote an amazing Star Trek novel that came out that finishes the story of the woman who was the whale biologist from Star Trek 4, the one with the whales, right? Where the whole thing is like there's a podcaster in our era who's trying to figure out how this whale biologist disappeared and gets sucked into a Star Trek mystery, and it's really good. I know people sometimes look down on tie-in novels, but like Greg really did great job with that
Also,
one.
most of us got started reading tie-ins, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my first adult science fiction novel was a Star Wars tie-in. So
Yeah. And I just wanted to put a shout out to Greg's. It's called Lost to Eternity. It's great. It ties in 3 different timelines from like 2024, the original series era, and like right around the time of Star Trek 6 in the story. It's really good. Greg did a great job, and I want to give him a shout out for that. I really thought it was great. So he'll be on next time to talk about Richard Matheson, and I'm working on some other Matheson heavyweights. So people who knew him, worked with him, and that will be next on the Science Fiction Hall of Fame series. Besides that, I'm not sure what I'm doing on the podcast. I've got some things coming up, but always look out for the PKD Hangouts, people. And thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time on Postcards from a Dying World.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, this was awesome. Bye, folks.